Hello, everybody. Today, I want to start our study of what I call the Earth's biotic enterprise, meaning how can we appreciate biodiversity? And I have to say, I find it very difficult to find a way to convey the meaningfulness of the grandeur of life to people who don't feel that. All I can say is most children have a fascination with animals, usually with nature in general. They love to be outside, playing in somewhat wild environs. And then as people age, as we move to adulthood, many people lose touch with that sense of wonder and that sense of awe about the natural world. And only occasionally are they reminded of it. To those of us who haven't lost such a sense, it is very difficult to explain what we mean by our sense of awe and wonder about the natural world. I often feel at a loss for words. So today, I'm going to take two approaches to try to give you an appreciation for the magnificence of life on the planet. The first approach is just to present the number of species, which is staggering. Currently, there are about 1.9 million described species of organisms on Earth. We live in a time when large numbers are so commonplace that we cease to be amazed by them. But 1.9 million species means that no one human can have expertise on anything other than a relatively small number of organisms. It is said that the human mind can maybe remember 1,000 names at a time. So learning about 1,000 types of organisms and what their ecology is, and remembering their names and where they live, etc., is beyond the scope of an individual. Now, in order for a species to be formally described, it has to be written up in a scientific paper that makes that formal description. It has to be given a name. A type specimen, meaning the specimen on which you have based your description, needs to be deposited in a museum. So there's a whole scientific process for doing this. The people who do this kind of work are known as taxonomists or systematists. And in recent years, funding for them has dried up, and we have fewer and fewer of them at a time when we're realizing the increasing importance of biodiversity. The estimate of the number of undescribed species, that means the ones that are waiting for formal description, ranges from another million or so to more than 30 million. Here you can see I've got a total of about 11 million total species on Earth, of which there are almost 2 million described. And chordates, those are things like us with a backbone. There's 65,000 described, and it's going to be another 15 or so thousand to describe. Invertebrates, those are things without backbones. There's 1.4 million described, and the middle of the road estimate is that there's 6.8 million total. So that's about 5.4 million species yet to describe. Plants, we're doing a pretty good job there. 310,000 plants described, about 391,000 estimated to exist. Fungi, a poor total. We're 1/15 of the way there. And the rest of life, we're really poorly off. 66,000 out of 2,600,000 species that are estimated. So that gives you an idea of the immensity of Earth's biotic enterprise. The second thing I want to talk about is the immensity of time. And this was something Darwin realized. He understood that to be where we are now must have taken a huge amount of time, and therefore he inferred that the Earth was very old. He would be shocked to find out how old we know that it is now. So huge amounts of time were needed to get the planet to the ecological state that it was when humans evolved about 300,000 years ago. The Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, That's the equivalent of almost 59 million human lifetimes. Now, from the Earth's beginning about 4.5 billion years ago, it took about 800 million years for life to evolve, and it is now thought that 3.8 billion years ago, life was present on the planet. The type of complex cell of which we are made, that has a nucleus, that contains membrane-bound organelles, that has multiple linear chromosomes, that contains the symbiotically evolved mitochondria and chloroplasts, those took another billion years to appear and were present by about 2.8 billion years ago. At the same time, some bacteria began introducing oxygen into the atmosphere, and it took another 300 to 400 million years to raise oxygen levels to those that are similar to what we have today. Eukaryotes then took a further 2 billion years to organize into the simplest animals, which were present by about 800 million years ago. And our current understanding of the simplest animal is a sponge. Sponges lack true tissues, but are comprised of different kinds of cells that function together, and they use gametes to recreate a multicellular individual. In other words, they reproduce sexually. It took a further 300 million years, but the first animal with a backbone appeared by 530 million years ago. Another 50 million years or so passed, and the first multicellular plants moved onto the land. Before this, all life was in the sea. After another 50 million years, the first animals, which were undoubtedly arthropods, insect-like things, moved onto land where a veritable vegetarian feast awaited them, and that occurred somewhere between 415 and 425 million years ago. By 375 million years ago, the first limbed vertebrate walked upon the land, although it probably had to go back and forth to the water and wasn't completely a terrestrial animal. 75 million years ago, another 300 million years have passed, the ancestors of primates separated from rabbits and rodents, our closest mammalian relatives. 6 million years ago, the human lineage and the chimpanzee lineages diverged from each other. And then by 300,000 years ago, modern humans had evolved. Hopefully that gives you some perspective about the passage of time. Another way to think about it is to imagine that all of the Earth's history were compressed into a single 24-hour day, with the Earth forming at midnight. It's not until 4 a.m. that life evolves. By 9 a.m. we have eukaryotes, so those happened relatively quickly. It's not for a further 9 hours until sexual reproduction evolves. And then by 7:44 p.m., the first animals. We're now a little over 4 hours from midnight. By 9:52 p.m., plants move to land. With an hour and 4 minutes to go to the present, dinosaurs appeared. And then, with a minute and 55 seconds to go, the human lineage split from chimpanzees. And finally, with 4 seconds before midnight, modern humans evolved. We have been here for the blink of an eye. 4 seconds in the 24-hour day of life. So, what are the great lessons that time has taught us? Well, first, life evolved relatively quickly, and I think that's surprising. I'm shocked that it took under a billion years. Most of the history of life has been unicellular. Multicellular animals are a blink in the time span of the Earth compared to unicellular organisms. Most of the history of life has occurred in the sea. 3.3 billion years out of the 3.8 billion years of life were strictly confined to the sea. Given large periods of time, life changes the geology of the planet. Think about it. No oxygen until a certain bacteria, much like today's blue-green algae, started to put oxygen into the atmosphere. Or think about a lifeless, soilless land surface that then was colonized by plants that created soils and created the conditions for the ecosystems we see today in a mere 450 million years. Once sex evolved, multicellularity evolved. And once multicellularity evolved, the Earth changed rapidly as a result of the colonization of land. Humans have changed the ecology of the planet significantly, but they've done so most significantly at an incredible scale and pace, especially since the Industrial Revolution, which began a mere 180 years ago. Now, it's worthwhile saying something about the origin of life, because the origin of life is still a great mystery. We've pieced together some ideas about how life must have originated, but it is still a very murky understanding that we have. It is thought that the chemistry of the Earth's early atmosphere and early ocean, much of which is fairly well understood, was such that large organic molecules were produced spontaneously and existed in the ocean. So it is believed that the building block molecules such as amino acids, nucleotides, phospholipids, fatty acids, and sugars, that these building block molecules of the large biological molecules that are necessary for life, those large biological molecules being proteins, nucleic acids, lipids, and carbohydrates, that these building block molecules existed in the ocean. The basic structure of the cell membrane we now know self-forms when phospholipids are put into water. So the basic structure that contains the cell spontaneously forms as a result of the physics between phospholipids and water. At some point, some of these molecules must have been able to self-replicate. Once a group of molecules has the ability to acquire an energy source and self-replicate and is contained within a membrane, then we say that life has begun. And I find one of the most fascinating themes that runs through my study of biology is that when I look at biochemistry, individual cellular processes, such as the replication of DNA or the transcription and translation of a gene, these processes are incredibly machine-like in their actions. There is nothing lifelike about them. But if you get enough of these molecular machines wrapped inside a plasma membrane, then you get what we call life. So I hope that this introductory talk has given you some appreciation for the biodiversity that has evolved on this planet in immense amount of time to create a truly extraordinary number of different organisms which are fellow members of our spaceship Earth. Until next time, think hard and study hard.